don't scare easy. That's not me trying to sound tough. It's just mileage. When you spend most of your adult life staring at the country through a windshield, your nerves adapt. You learn that the wind can make a sound like a voice, and the voice can be a fence line whistling, and that most things that go bump near the truck at 3 a.m. are raccoons or a bored guy on a forklift. You learn where the road waves and heaves, where the radios go dead, which scales are open, which diners will refill your coffee until you forget your real name. You learn the shape of night. I thought I knew it anyway. Before I tell this, you should know I'm not fresh out here. I got my CDL at 22, started on dry van, switched to reefer because it paid better, and I don't mind the hum. I've hauled flowers in January and ice cream in August and meat when the temp had to stay steady at 28 degrees like it was a living thing. I've parked on shoulders in Wyoming with the wind trying to roll me, and I've slept behind Walmarts, and I've had bears. Highway patrol, not the furry kind. Tap on my door with a flashlight and my heart still stayed regular. The thing that happened last fall made me add a new habit. I don't talk on 19 unless I have to. I keep a roll of quarters in the dash. I don't stop at mile markers that end in 6. And I don't play with the little coin a waitress taped under my bill at a truck stop in Missouri, because that coin is why I'm here. It started with a simple run. Pick up in the middle of Nebraska at a cold storage, drop in Orlando, 2 days ticking the clock legal if I hustled. I had the miles to know what I was doing. My dispatcher, Tony, called me the night before and said the magic words, preloaded, sealed, paperwork in the box. That's like Christmas for a driver. No waiting for a warehouse to discover your appointment never existed. I could grab and go. I hit the yard in Grand Island just before midnight. It was that time of year when the air smells empty, like someone wrung the moisture out. The cold storage lit the night like stadium lights. Forklifts whined in the alley between docks. A yard dog did that aggressive zigzag they all do, like he's picking a fight with his own trailer. I backed under the loaded reefer in one pull because sometimes the road gods nod at you for no reason. Cranked the landing gear up until my forearms burnt, and did my walk around. The seal number was a neat little red tag with 060606 on it, which I only remember because I love patterns. The bills of lading had Customer Ref 606 stamped on them too. I didn't take that as a sign. It just made my brain happy for a second. Temp was set to 28. Reefer was humming. Tires thumped good. Lights all around. I checked my glad hands, made sure my lines weren't pinched, and rubbed grease off my hands with a blue shop towel until I looked less like a mechanic and more like a person. Inside the office, a woman I didn't know had left the packet in a bin with my truck number on it. There's always a coffee pot by the door. I took a cup because I'm basically a plant that runs on caffeine and diesel. On the wall, someone had tacked up a handwritten list of reminders for drivers. The usual. Go slow on the yard, chalk your wheels, no idling by dock doors. At the bottom, like a joke, somebody had scribbled, leave a quarter under the counter for mile 606. The 606 was underlined 3 times. Next to it, someone else had written, don't encourage him, Janice. Under that, a third hand. Toll's cheaper than the ticket. I smiled. I have a soft spot for inside jokes I'm not inside for. I fished a quarter out of my pocket, slid it under a napkin at the coffee station, and didn't think another thing about it. I pulled onto the highway at 12:17 a.m. The sky had that flat look it gets out there, like a blackboard. The interstate eastbound was a ribbon of headlights when there were headlights, and a corridor of my own beams when there weren't. The CB popped and hissed with the usual. Hammer down. Bear at the 389. Where's the party? I turned it down. It was me. A meat load, 28-degree air in a box behind me, and a long haul to the land of palmettos. First odd thing was small. Not spooky. Just odd. About an hour out, around York, my radio caught a voice I didn't recognize on 19, clear enough to cut through the static like it was sitting in my passenger seat. Breaker 19 for Paperboy, you got your ears on? Paperboy is my handle. I didn't choose it. It stuck after 1,000,000 years ago when I showed up to orientation with a rolled-up road atlas and a grin. The old hands called me Paperboy because of the atlas, and because I was young, and because trucker humor is unkind but affectionate. I kept it because it feels like mine now. Go ahead, I said. You're clean. You're light as shadow, the voice said, amused. You lost something back there. I glanced into the mirrors out of pure habit, even though I know that's ridiculous when someone says a thing like that. The trailer was there. Lines were there. All my lights were there, blinking their neat little red pattern like they always do. Say again, I said, because you don't go weird immediately when someone is weird on the radio. You're light as shadow, he said again. You want to pick it up before you hit the gray. I went silent. I'm not above messing around on 19 when I'm bored and the line is long. But it wasn't crowded, it wasn't storming, and the voice didn't have that bored trucker tone. It had this clean tone I've only ever heard from cops and pilots and men who give instructions to cranes. Copy, I said finally, because what else do you say to that? I'll be on your 6 for a minute, he said. And then he was gone. I caught myself looking into the mirrors again, which is deeply stupid. The mirror sees what it sees. If your shadow's wrong, a glance isn't going to fix it. I shook my head, turned the radio down to a whisper, and told myself it was probably some guy I'd crossed once who remembered me and decided to make my night weird as a favor. The second odd thing is harder to file under just truck stuff. The mile markers started counting wrong. This was on 80, eastbound, and I know that road like I know my own dashboard. I know exactly where I can run 72 and where I should run 65 because the troopers get bored. And I know which overpasses are patched. And I know where the shoulder turns into hockey puck-sized gravel that will put a dime-sized chip in your windshield. The markers should have been counting down like they do in any eastbound direction job. Instead, they did 389, 388, 387, 386, 386, 386, 385. You see a repeat sometimes when a marker gets knocked down and they replace it wrong. 3 repeats though, and the first one had a slant like it had been staked in soft dirt. The 385 had a bullet chip in the 5 that looked like a missing tooth. The fourth 386 had a fresh pole. I know what a fresh pole looks like because I hit one my first year and had to pay for a new one, and I'd burned that shape into my brain with money. I slowed a hair, told myself I was tired, and then laughed at myself for slowing down for numbers on sticks. The reefer hummed steady. 28 degrees. The air that leaks back through the seams when you hit a bump was colder than my vents and made little ghosts in the cab when it pooled. At the next exit, I rolled off and rolled right back on because I wanted to see if I'd been in my own head. The merge ramp was the same, which logic says it would be. The marker at the bottom of the ramp said 383, and that number made sense to nothing. I looked east. The next marker said 386 again, like it had been waiting for me. Breaker 19. Someone else came on, a woman this time, tight voice, no accent that I could place. Paperboy, you ignore him. Go ahead, I said, stupidly relieved to hear anyone else saying my name. You don't stop for him, she said. Keep your wheels moving. You stop. He opens your back door. 10-4, I said, like I've been saying it my whole adult life. Who's him? Nobody you got room for, she said. You running sealed? Affirmative. 28 degrees? She asked. I stared at the thermostat like it had betrayed me. That's a guess, I said. That's a pattern, she said, voice so flat it made the hair on my arms rise. Keep moving on the gray. You'll know it when you're on it. The gray what? I asked. Gray mile, she said, as if that should be as familiar to me as chicken coop and bear in the median. Before I could get smart or scared enough to ask more, the radio spit static like a cat and went quiet. The screen still said it was on 19. The little green light did its friendly little green light thing. There was just nothing there now. Everything outside looked normal except for the numbers on the sticks and the way the ditches looked like they were holding their breath. All right. I'm not an idiot. I could have pulled off. I could have gone to the nearest truck stop and eaten the penalty of being late against the idea of dealing with whatever this is. Except the voice said, don't stop. And here's where the stupid human part of me comes in. I didn't want to admit I was rattled by a ghost story on an interstate I've driven almost every week for years. The road has pride built into it. You start thinking of your record with it like a relationship. You don't want to give it ammunition. The night did that thing I hate, where fog isn't fog. But the air gets pearly and full of dust and the headlights make a tunnel I can almost touch. I set the cruise at 64, because 64 is the number I do when I want it to feel like I'm being cautious, without actually being cautious. I kept my eyes soft on the road, not hunting for shapes. You never want to look for shapes. Shapes will find your brain if your brain wants them. Then the banging started. If you've never hauled a reefer, you need to know that loads shift, crates settle, beef slaps in its own brown boxes. You feel it sometimes, an inch tug here, a roll there, but you don't usually hear it over the hum of the unit and the little shriek of the wind. This was a knock, clean, like knuckles on a hollow door. 6 times, 6 in a row, then still. The kind of knock I'd answer in my own house, and then immediately regret answering if I didn't recognize the person. I turned the radio off because I didn't like the idea of anything listening to me listen to it. I glanced at the mirrors, habit again, and saw nothing but the glow of my own lights on aluminum. I checked the reefer through the cab display, because mine's fancy enough to do that. 28. Consistent. I said out loud, you're tied and sealed and you're behaving and I am not playing games. Because if you drive alone long enough, you start narrating your life just so there's a voice to put shape on the inside of your skull. Knock, 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 knock. I didn't flinch the second time. That's a point of pride I should probably not be proud of. I reached over, touched the red and yellow knobs that control the trailer and tractor brakes, and whispered, "Don't you dare." That's not how brakes work, obviously. You can't talk to air. But I've watched my hands do more ridiculous things on slick roads, and sometimes you let your body do what it thinks will help. Up ahead, the glow of a rest area sign grew out of the pearl. The The sign was brown like the old ones, not the blue with little icons. It said, "Rest area 1 mile," and under that, in those white letters you only see on signs older than you, "Pay telephone." It looked like a photograph my dad would have taken. My stomach tightened. I passed it. The next sign said, "Way station 3 miles." The little word "open" was dark. Then it flicked. It flicked not open like you're used to when you get the joy of rolling your rig over a scale. It flicked through patterns. Open, closed, open. Then the lights around it caught and stuck on the word "open" an instant before I reached the sign, like someone had licked their thumb and pressed. I said out loud to the empty cab, "Nope." The CB popped like it had something it couldn't hold. "You stop for him," the clean men who give instructions voice said, amused. "He'll be polite. You blow by, he climbs the catwalk." I turned it back on with my thumb without meaning to. Habit again. The woman's voice came so close to over the top of his that if you know radio, you know they were sitting so close in the spectrum, the machines should have choked. "Keep your wheels moving," she said. And because my brain wanted a face, I pictured a woman with crow's feet and a bun and a dash of contempt for me and my stupid male insistence on learning things the hard way. "I'm going to throw hands with both of you," I said, because panic makes me chatty. "See you at Marrow Point if you make it," the man said, like a dad as you pedal a bike without him holding the seat anymore. "Don't let him count," the woman said. The scale house ramp pulled at me like it does when you know it's open, and your day is about to be longer than you want it to be. I kept to the right lane. I stared straight ahead. I pretended there was a Walmart truck in front of me that had chosen to ignore the scale too, because that's a thing that happens in real life. And I'm apparently the kind of person who thrives on pretending things are normal when they are not. The fine was better than whatever him wanted. I could pay the fine. I couldn't pay for what happens when a stranger climbs your catwalk. I rolled by. The banging on the door stopped. The reefer changed pitch like it takes a breath sometimes. My steering went light. It's a feeling you know. Like a crosswind has just decided to see if you're awake. It wasn't wind. The trees were still. The grass in the ditch had frozen mid-bow. My engine note tightened as the load on it changed in a way no gauge agreed with. Like a hitchhiker had clambered up the ladder to the back of the cab and settled on the fairing behind me to ride, one hand in the air like a kid who just figured out where his center of gravity is. I'd like to say I didn't swear. I did. A lot, and creatively. I did the thing where you lean forward an inch, and it feels like somehow you've made that inch of a difference, which is about the dumbest human trick there is. I talked to the wheel. I braced my boot just to the right of the throttle like that would matter. I ran 65, because 65 is what you do when the Iowa State Patrol is bored at night and nothing else wants to go crazy. The highway bent. The same rest area sign came up again, which the third time you can ignore, but the second time you have to admit to yourself you already saw. The markers flashed their wrong numbers. The world went gray and then grayer, like I was driving inside a coin. "Paperboy," the woman said on 19, steady as a nurse. "When you hit Marrow Point, you go up the ramp. Don't stop before. Don't overshoot. If you overshoot, you're in it another 6 miles and you don't have 6 in you." "Marrow what?" I asked. "You'll know," she said. "You got toll money?" "I got a fleet card," I said, because humor keeps your brain from melting. "You got coins?" she asked again, and I looked down at my dash where the sloppy little compartment collects receipts and coffee stirrers, and realized there was a roll of quarters there. I'm a cash user because sometimes the pump doesn't like my card. I hadn't rewrapped the roll after breaking into it 3 weeks ago to pay for a bad cup of coffee in Kansas. It had a rubber band around it. "Affirmative," I said. "You'll need 6, she said. "I left one under a napkin for Janice," I said before I could stop myself, and then I wondered why I said it that way. "Janice has a sense of humor that'll get somebody killed one day," the man said, and I could hear him smiling, which made me hate him in a friend way. "You drop 6 or you drop blood. Your choice." I wanted to be the guy who says, "What if I keep driving?" I wanted to be the guy who says, "I'll just wait it out." But the thing on my catwalk shifted in a way that made my seat squeak, and I realized with absolute clarity that it wanted me to keep driving. Not forever, not to safety. It wanted me rolling because there was a place it needed me to go at speed, so the door would open sweet when I got there. "Okay," I said. "What side?" "Driver," the woman said. "He doesn't like the yellow line. It makes him twitch." "We all do," I said, and that got a little giggle from her, and I felt almost human for a second, like we were in a break room talking about how cops love to sit 2 miles past the reduced speed ahead sign. The off-ramp to Marrow Point didn't have a regular sign. It had a wooden one, the kind with routed letters you see at state parks and attractions with a pioneer in the name. It said Marrow Point in white on green, and underneath, in smaller letters, Scales. The ramp curved slow and tight like an old house staircase. I downshifted. I did the thing with my eyes where I keep scanning wider than the turn so the position of my nose doesn't lie to me, and the thing on the catwalk shifted closer. "You touch my door, I swear to God." I said to nothing. The weight didn't change, but the awareness of wanting to changed. My skin knew where it would go if it were a hand. Left side because of the yellow line. My breath got shallow, which I forced deeper because you don't do anything useful without oxygen, buddy. The way station looked like a movie set left to rot. The building was brick, the kind of brick that absorbs all light. The glass had wire in it. The sign that had open or closed had individual bulbs that made the letters instead of a digital bar. It said open, and the O was missing the top, so it looked like a U, and it made my mouth want to laugh. I didn't. "Don't roll the scale," the woman said. "Stay to the left. There's a little pull-out by the phone." "Why would I started, and then I saw the phone. It had a metal hood over it and a coil cord, and nobody had used it since maybe the year I was born, and my brain said, "That's where you go when you don't have a choice." "Stop by the phone," the man said, "but don't set your brakes." "What?" I said like a guy who's driven one day, and not the 12 years it's actually been. "You set your brakes. He knows he can climb," the woman said. "You hold your foot on the service the whole time. If your leg cramps, you deal with it." "Why don't you come do it for me?" I said, voice going up the way it does when you're dancing on a cliff edge you can't see. "Because we're not country anymore," the man said, and the way he said it made me want to argue religion. "Hurry up now. He's got a long reach." The pull-out by the phone was barely long enough for my tractor. I made it work. I'm not bragging. You just do. I stopped with my left door opposite the phone. I could have rolled the window down. I didn't. I pressed my left foot hard on the pedal until my thigh sang. I popped the rubber band off the roll of quarters with my right hand and grabbed 6. I put 3 between my molars, tasted coins. Because you lose fingers, you drop money. I was not going to chase a quarter under my seat while someone no one should give a ride to reached for my door. The phone was old enough that the coin slot was a rectangle. I opened my door with my right hand like a dancer and stuck my upper body out. The air was colder by an inch from the truck, like the line of the door held summer and winter apart. Something touched the lower left corner of the door, casual, a brush, like a knee. I didn't look. If you think I looked, you haven't been paying attention. I put a quarter in the slot. It clicked. I put the second in. It clicked. The third rolled back down and landed in the return tray, and the sound of it landing made the thing outside go very still, in a way that hurt. Not because of the quiet, because of the attention. You know when someone you love looks up at you from the couch and every part of them says, "Yes, I'm here"? It was the opposite. It was a point of being seen I didn't want. I thumped the return, got the quarter back, licked it like an idiot because my fingers were suddenly wet and I didn't know if it was sweat or air or something I didn't want to name, and shoved it hard and sure, and it went where it was supposed to go. 3 more, 6 total. The phone clicked in my ear even though I hadn't picked it up. It rang once, like the one in my aunt's kitchen that hadn't rung for a year in that other life. "Say your handle," the man said in my ear. Except it wasn't over the radio. It was through the phone. "Paperboy," I said, with the coin taste in my mouth making the P funnier than it should have been. "Say your name," the woman said, and that's when I felt something like fingers under the edge of the door, just enough to get the tip under the rubber, test the seal. I said my name, the real one, the one on my license, the one only cops and my mother use. The phone made a noise like someone turning a heavy page. The weight on the catwalk lightened. Not less there, less close. The edge of my door got cold enough that my skin prickled and then warmed like somebody had removed something that blocked the night from being just night. I put the receiver back down so hard I nearly broke it, and I do not apologize. Then a voice very close to my ear said, "Do me a favor and run." The voice wasn't in the phone. It wasn't on the radio. It wasn't outside. It was 1 inch to the left of my left eye, like someone was in the cab politely leaning in to comment on the weather. It wasn't the man. It wasn't the woman. It wasn't anyone I know. It was polite. That's the worst thing about it. If it had been nasty, I would have known what to do. I slammed the door. I didn't roll up the window because it wasn't down. I put both hands on the wheel because you do that when you need to tell your body it has something to hold. I eased off the pedal and rolled forward. I did not look at the scale house. I did not look at the window where, in my head, a person in a uniform might have been standing very still, one hand resting on the counter, waiting to see if I would make them move. I stayed to the left, like she said. The ramp back to the highway was short. I hit the merge at 50, hit the hammer because sometimes you get to be crude, and the engine did that hot, happy thing it does when it thinks you're going to let it run. The highway opened like a mouth. I went in. The markers counted right for a bit. The fog lifted off the road like it had been poured and then drained. My radio was quiet, blessedly. I didn't touch the reefer display even though I deeply wanted to. I let miles collect like coins, one after the other, heavy in my palm. At dawn, A truck stop, I swear to you, wasn't on that stretch the day before, came up like a mirage that decided to be useful for once. It wasn't a chain. It had a sign that said, Darlene 66 in a font I've only seen on hats that live in basements. I pulled in because my leg hurt, and I wanted to sit on something that didn't move and drink something that had that thin diner coffee smell like the steam off a sidewalk after rain. Darlene 66 had 5 pumps. The parking lot was mostly empty. The store had the kind of tile they stopped making in the 80s, and a rack of tapes you could borrow for a deposit that no one will ever play again. The counter had a jar labeled toll with a handful of quarters in it. I put 2 in because I'm not a monster. The woman behind the register had a name tag that said Dar, and she slid me a cup with a chipped handle like she'd been waiting to do that all night. You made it off, she said, like I'd come in from a storm. I sat at the counter because I don't like my back to the room when I'm on that many hours, and the coffee marker had a burn ring around it like a target. Off what? I asked. She lifted one eyebrow like she wasn't sure if we were going to play this game or not. Gray Mile, she said. Never heard of it, I lied. She laughed without showing her teeth. That's the point, she said. If you'd heard of it, it'd live in your head. The less it lives in your head, the less it lives at all. The cook, old guy, hair like a broom, wearing a white paper cap because life is better if some people still wear paper caps, clanged a spatula on a flat top like a punctuation mark. Who's Marrow? I asked, because my mouth is sometimes smarter than my caution. Dar shrugged one shoulder like she didn't care if I believed her. The first guy who finally paid the toll, she said, depending on who you ask. The story changes because stories breed. From what my grandma said, in the 40s there was a stretch near here nobody could make at night without losing time or freight or courage. Marrow stuck with it, threw coins at what wanted him, said his name, didn't stop for the voice that sounded like his sister. He made it to the coop in the morning sane enough to write it down, and then he ran, and nobody blamed him. What happens if you don't pay? I asked. You did, she said, and poured me more coffee without asking like she'd known I'd ask that second question, and she wanted my hands occupied. Some people don't get asked. Some people get gifts. What kind of gifts? I asked, because I was pretending to be casual and doing a bad job. She took a battered quarter out of her apron pocket and set it on the counter. It was wrong. Not counterfeit wrong. Not heavy. Just wrong. The date said 1960, but the president's profile looked toward the wrong side. It looked like it did when I looked at my left hand in a mirror, and I know where the scars are, but they are reversed, and that reversal makes something in my brain buzz. We keep one on the counter to remind us to make change careful, she said. It shows up in the till sometimes. I don't let it leave. It's bad money. Money you spend comes back to you. We do not want this coming back. I put 2 in your jar, I said, which felt like a confession and a challenge in one. She watched me the way a person watches a dog they don't know decide whether to jump the fence. Then somebody left the road lighter today, she said. You running sealed? 28 degrees, I said, and she nodded like that meant we shared a thing. Don't break it unless you have to, she said. I know my job, I snapped, too tired and too close to losing my cool. Didn't say you didn't, she said, and wandered to the kitchen to yell at the cook about how I wanted eggs, because apparently she knew before I did that the thought of eating pancakes would make me want to lie down on the tile and die. I ate. I refilled my thermos. I peed the coffee out and washed my hands twice because the smell of cold air from a reefer unit had lodged in my nostrils, and I wanted something else in there. Above the urinal, someone had carved, "Don't let him count to 6" into the paint with a key, and somebody else had drawn a tally mark for 5 lines, and then not crossed it because they had the good sense to be superstitious in a bathroom. When I pushed the door to leave, a man coming in stepped aside the way people do in tight spaces. And for one terrible second, I thought he'd do that polite voice in my ear again. And it was just a guy. Just a guy in a cap with the logo of a company that doesn't exist anymore. Back in the cab, I fired up, checked my log, checked the load, checked my mirrors like a crazy person. 28, steady. Seal, intact. Quarters, 6 less. The road, just a road. I called Tony and lied. I told him traffic was weird. Nothing serious, on pace. See you in Florida. I didn't want to put the shape of it in my company's day. That's a dumb sentence, but if you've listened this far, you know what I mean. The next 100 miles were normal. Sun came up. I sang along to a terrible song on the radio because waking up a second time is a trucker's secret art. The road dreaded being the road, and then was the road again. I decided I had spooked myself and that the voices on 19 were a prank, pulled by locals who enjoyed messing with out-of-town drivers like it was someone's birthday. Then I passed the same broken-down cab over 3 times. You know the cab overs. Old. Chrome like a sick man's smile. Short rectangle of windshield. They're gone mostly, except the ones some guys keep alive for love. This one was pulled onto the shoulder with the hood flipped up like a mouth and Saint. Agnes Dairy, in a font that made me think of milk bottles with foil caps. It had a cow decal on the door that looked too cheery for a breakdown. First time I passed it, I did the scan you do to see if somebody needs a lift to the next exit. No one stood by it. Second time, I slowed a hair because I thought maybe this was the thing Mark used to tell, and it was my turn to be the good guy. No one. Third time, I laughed out loud and it didn't sound like me. "Paperboy," the woman said, which made my stomach drop because it meant we were back on that frequency. "Don't rubberneck. Do you just ride this stretch because you're bored?" I asked. "We listen," she said. "That's all we can do now." The man came on, softer than he had before, like he was letting her voice do the heavy lifting. "If you feel him settle, you pull off left, you throw 3 triangles, you keep your face down, and you wait for a real man to tap the glass. Not him, not the voice. Real knuckles, real flashlight. If you don't get that, you go to Marrow." "I already went to Marrow," I said, and maneuvered around a pothole big enough to put a small child in. "You'll go again if you don't watch your miles," she said. "He runs by 6s. He likes patterns. He likes rhythm. Don't give him a beat." "What does that mean?" I said. Because if there's one thing my father passed me, it's an urge to ask follow-up questions at the worst possible moment. You knock your dash with your hand? Don't do it 6. You blink to stay awake? Don't do it 6. You shift? Don't do it on a pattern he can climb. He likes ladders. "I can barely control my bladder some days," I said. "I'm not going to count blinks for a demon." "You will if you want to walk away," she said, and that shut me up. "Okay. You're waiting for the part where the door opens. Me too. It didn't. That would be a good story. Door swings, air goes colder than diesel. I'm dragged out by a thing half smell and half man, My coffee thermos clatters and I never tell you any of this. That isn't my story. What happened was worse. The door tried to be a door for someone else. Somewhere south of Kansas City, running down 49, you get these stretches where it's just you and grain silos and the memory of towns that used to be something when cattle moved different. I was on one. The sun had the angle it gets where if I let it, it would crawl into my skull and take a nap behind my eyes. I was doing 64 and trying very hard to be a person who drinks water instead of coffee because my doctor has opinions. The reefer was humming an old song that I know means it's happy. I passed an exit with a church and a closed antique mall, and a guy on a John Deere loader who waved like he didn't have to. Knock, not on the door, on the back wall of the cab. 6. Slow and careful, like a hand patting a dog. I have an older sleeper. It's not huge. The back wall is close enough that if you're sitting in the driver's seat, you can reach behind you and touch the curtain. It's just metal and insulation and sound deadening, and a thin layer of fabric a designer somewhere pretended was an accent. Nothing and nobody should be able to knock it from outside, unless they were sitting on the mattress and bored. I kept my eyes on the road. I kept my left knee crooked. My right foot stayed where it needed to be. My hands hung on the wheel like a person hanging onto a monkey bar over lava. The knock came again. 6. Not urgent, not aggressive. Familiar. Familiar in a way I didn't want to identify because my wife knocks that way when she has groceries and wants me to help, and the back of my heart recognized it like a piece of music at a distance and did a stupid leap that hurt me. "Babe," a voice said, very soft. "Open up. You have to understand something. I'm probably the last person on earth to fall for a voice. I know better. I know voices come through vents and wires and walls. I know my own brain is capable of doing an impression that would win an award. I know loneliness is a tiger. I also hadn't seen my wife in 3 weeks, and she has a way of saying that word that makes me an idiot. "No," I said to the empty cab, to my shame, and I said it like I love her, and the shame is that I did. "Don't answer him," the woman said. So close on the radio I almost hit the button to shut her up on reflex, because we were about to have a problem about what we do in front of company. "Not her," I said through my teeth. "That's what I said," she said. The knock didn't come a third time. The back wall got colder, then warmer, then cold again, like someone had leaned into it with their spine, and then taken their coat off and put it down, and then changed their mind. I drove 50 miles remembering every good thing my wife has ever said to me in grocery store parking lots, and hating the road for knowing that catalog better than it should. Florida came like a wet towel. You can feel it from 100 miles out. The air picks up water, and the green starts to look lush enough to mold your shoes. I wasn't okay, but I was functioning, which is 90% of this job. I rolled into the customer's lot with 20 minutes to spare, and a fresh layer of sweat from the cold storage, because the humid cold is the worst cold, and anybody who says different hasn't backed into a door down there at noon. The receiver at the dock had a face like he didn't want to be there, and maybe didn't want to be anywhere. He scanned my BOL. He nodded at my seal. He checked the temp with the little probe that makes me want to laugh even though it's not funny, because every one of those probes goes in everything and we all pretend it's science. He signed. He waved a hand. I backed into the door. I popped the brakes. I felt like somebody had taken a strap off my chest. I climbed out of the cab to pull the seal. Here's where I tell you the thing I didn't tell my dispatcher or my wife. or anyone but you and strangers at Darlene 66. There were 6 quarters on the catwalk behind my cab. They were stacked, not balanced, like somebody with hands had put them there for someone with other hands to find and decide whether to be grateful about. They were dark, like they'd been in a fire or a pocket with pennies for a year. They weren't mine because mine are rolled or loose, and these had an oil sheen on them that smelled like the weird sweet smell of reefer juice when a unit is brand new. On the top quarter, someone had scratched a 5-pointed star with something sharp, 5 little lines that didn't meet in the middle. On the bottom one, the president's head faced left, not right. There was a strip of corn silk braided through the holes in the metal too, like a bracelet, and we were nowhere near corn anymore. I stood there like a picture of a driver in a brochure, hand on the handle on the side of the cab, looking like I was thinking about diesel prices, while my head tried to exit via my ears. I should have brushed them off. I should have told myself it was a prank and gotten mad. I should have held them up and said, "Haha, nice one, Dar." I should have done anything normal. I took them. I put them in the little compartment under my dash next to the old sunglasses and the spare flashlight and the weird shit drivers keep. I wiped the rail with a rag because I didn't want to feel the presence of coins when I reached up there later. I broke the seal with a punch, and the little red tag trilled across the concrete like a wounded bird. I opened the doors. Cold spilled out and made the world new. The dock guy wheeled up in his little hoodie like the cold was personal, and I stepped back because it's his show now. That's one of the best feelings in this job. You've done your part. It's someone else's problem. He pointed into the quarry cold light and frowned. "What the hell happened to your load?" he asked. "What?" I asked, because I'm very clever. He tilted his head and gave me a look like he'd schedule a fight with me if he had time. "It looks frosted," he said, and he wasn't wrong. The boxes inside had a sheen on them I don't know how to describe. You know when a windshield fogs and then defogs and leaves a film you only see at night? It was like that. It wiped off when he rubbed it, and then when he didn't look, it crept back. He shrugged because it would be whoever's in there's problem, and we are all just soldiers. They unloaded me. I waited. I signed. I got my copy. Nobody said anything about refused pallets. Nobody told me to bring back the quarter that belonged to 13 different decades at once. I was a ghost, holding a ghost, that had decided to take the same road as me back to the Midwest. I could stop now, and the story is good enough for a Reddit post. I'll keep going because some of you know me, and I need to finish it for me. I ran empty out of Florida, which is the worst kind of drive unless you like orange peels and humidity. I stopped in Lake City for fuel and stood under the shade a second longer than I needed to, because I didn't want to get back in the truck with the quarters. I waved at a kid in flip-flops who was fascinated by my airlines because I was him once. I got back in and shut the door, and the little rush of cool air from the vent smelled faintly like pennies. I told myself I was imagining it. If lying gets you from one state to another, lie low and move quick. Northbound, I kept the radio off. I kept my speed friendly. I called my wife, told her I'd see her in 2 days, pretended not to hear the thing her voice does when she's keeping something to say to me for when I get home because she doesn't want to cry on a phone. I sang along to a sermon, me, of all people, because sometimes you need someone to talk steady for an hour and not ask you for anything. Crossing Georgia, it was fine. Crossing Tennessee, It was hills and breath, and the feeling that the truck was tired in the joints. Crossing Missouri, the air thinned out, and I could breathe. Crossing back into Nebraska, I told myself I'd stop at Darlene's and put the coins in the jar, and the jar would be heavier, and my head would be lighter. That's what I told myself. I pulled into Darlene's 66 at 2 in the morning because if you want an empty lot and a coffee, you go then. The sign buzzed. A moth the size of a child's fist battered itself to death above the door. I walked in with the coins in my pocket, all 6, because I'm not the guy who takes money from the dead and spends it. Dar looked up, and the cook grunted, and everything made sense in the way that a diner makes sense at 3. "You made it back," she said. "I want to buy something," I said, and took the quarters out like a magician. "Something cheap." She looked at them and didn't touch them, which made me love her for a second in a dirty boots human way. "I can take 3, she said. "You keep 3. That's how it balances." "I don't want it to balance," I said. "I want it to be done." "It won't be," she said, gentle enough that I wanted to be angry at her because I needed my anger for someone. "You keep 3 for the next driver who doesn't know. You give 3 to someone you love who thinks they can carry heavy without paying a toll. That's how you don't pass the whole bill." "You're making this up," I said, even though my hand wanted to put 3 coins into a jar, and I would have stepped into traffic to make my hand disobey me. "Baby," she said, and I heard my mother for the first time in a decade. "We all are. That's what keeps it in the form we can hold." I put 3 coins in the jar. They landed with a sound like the coil in an old radio warming. She put a paper cup under the coffee and slid it to me, and her hand brushed mine, and the place where our skin met felt like a cold coin, and then like nothing at all. "What's Marrow Point?" I asked again because apparently questions are my breathing. She smiled. It hit her eyes this time. "You already know it," she said. "But if you want a sign to feel better, there's an actual historical marker 6 miles east. People wrote what they could. The story lives in the spaces. I drove the 6 miles because I am exactly that guy." There it was. A wooden sign with white letters telling a story about a man whose truck stalled at midnight and who held a coin in his mouth like a saint with a nail, who walked up to a phone and said his name and then drove away. The plaque was put up by a service club, Lions or Masons or whoever gets together and eats potatoes and decides the town needs a bench. Someone had taped a quarter to the bottom of the sign. Scuffed. Old. The president looked the right way. Somebody else had tried to pry it off and failed and left fingerprints like smudges. Somebody else had written at the bottom with a marker. "Say it out loud." The words were going faint, because rain doesn't care about wisdom unless it's carved in stone. And we were not. But I said my name out loud in the night anyway. A truck passed and the driver flashed his headlights at me, and I flashed mine back, and somewhere a kid on a John Deere slept in a house he would leave one day and come back to. And the road had a mouth, and I did not put my hand in it. I went home. I hugged my wife. I told her a version of this that made it sound like I was tired, and you know how night makes you. I put 1 coin in the little dish by our door, where she keeps her keys and hair ties, and the ring she takes off when she does dishes. She picked it up the next day and frowned like it was a smell. "What's this?" she asked. "Bad money," I said. "Don't spend it." She shrugged, left it, forgot it like we forget hard things if they aren't loud. A week later she texted me a picture, the quarter on the dish, and next to it, A note from our niece who comes over on Tuesdays that said, "Uncle's coin says hi." I called my wife. She laughed it off. I said, "Put it in an envelope for me." She said, "You're weird." I said, "Yes." And she said, "I love you." And the road went quiet in my ear for a minute like it was listening to a better story. I keep the other 2 coins in the truck. One under the dash in a little felt-lined slot the manufacturer put there for sunglasses, wrapped in an old fuel receipt from a place in Utah where the coffee is terrible and the sunsets are their own religion. One taped under the rubber mat by my left heel, where I can feel it sometimes on a long grade when my brain wants to count and the count goes wrong at 6. I don't talk about the gray mile on 19. Drivers who want to act like they're big talk it up like it's a party trick, and then you don't hear them anymore. Drivers who know are quiet. If somebody comes on with fear in their voice and says my handle and asks if I've got my ears on, I tell them I do, and I tell them how to get to Merrow, and I tell them not to stop. And if they get mouthy, I tell them a story about a guy who let the thing in because it sounded like his mother and ended up parked on the shoulder at a wrong mile marker with the back doors open. And when another driver pulled over to help, there were just fingerprints on the ICC bumper, like someone had tried to hold on and didn't want to. And the reefer was still running, and that's the part that breaks me, because whoever runs those units will tell you they don't care about ghosts. They hum. You asked me for a trucker horror story. I gave you the one I know. It's not blood and claws and shadows in the bunk. It's the thing the road does when it wants a part of you to look at it. We all pay tolls. Sometimes the toll is time. Sometimes it's pride. Sometimes it's a coin you hold in your mouth like a saint because you don't have a hand free, and you need to remind yourself you have a name, and it's not, "Hey." If you're new out here, take this from your friend who has eaten more bad eggs at 2 a.m. than any human should. Keep a roll of quarters in the dash. Pay at the weird jar. If someone on 19 calls you by your handle, nice like they're your grandpa, turn it down and check your mirrors, and don't let your hands drum 6. If the phone at the scale house rings and the open sign can't make up its mind, say your name like you mean it and don't set your brakes. If a voice in your cab uses the word you only let one person use for you, love that person with your whole heart and let the voice sit in the cold until it decides you're boring. And if you ever find yourself at a place called Merrow Point with a pocket full of coins and your thighs screaming and the air cold enough to make your teeth ache, know this: you've got people on the radio who will talk you through. Some of us stayed to listen. Some of us made it out and we don't want to go back. All of us learned that the road isn't tame. It gets hungry and it gets old and it likes rhythm because rhythm is what keeps machines alive. Don't give it any more than you have to. Don't feed it on 6s. Keep your wheels moving. Don't stop for the voice. Pay the toll if the jar asks. I'm still out here. I'm rolling through a different night as I tell you this. A little halfway diner which doesn't know it's the halfway point for anyone but me. My wife's coin sits in a dish where it looks like money and isn't. And somewhere there's a wooden sign with a man's name on it, and a quarter taped to it that tourists take pictures with and don't understand. That's good. They don't have to. The road will talk to them in another language. This one is ours. I grew up around corn, not in the cute fall festival way, but in the practical skin-scraping way, where you know exactly how tall it'll be by the 4th of July, because you've bled on the leaves at least once by then. My aunt and uncle farmed a couple 100 acres in the middle of the state, the kind of place where the horizon is a straight line, and the nearest coffee shop is whatever you brew in the kitchen. We spent summers there when my parents needed a break from the city, and my aunt needed extra hands. So I learned the smell of a bin fan switching on at dusk. I learned that corn cuts you like paper and keeps on rustling like it didn't notice. I learned to listen for coyotes, for thunderstorms, for the creak of the old windmill even after they stopped using it. If you've never walked a cornfield at night, I don't actually recommend it. During the day, the rows are neat and logical. At night, they make a sound you can feel in your teeth. The leaves rasp against each other like whispering that doesn't need a mouth. Your headlamp catches bits of pollen and dust, and your brain decides they're eyes. The air is heavier in there. You sweat, and then you're cold, and then you sweat again. The rows funnel you. Turning around doesn't always put you back where you started. I'm telling you all this, so when I say what happened, you won't think I'm a city kid who got spooked by bugs. This was last August. My uncle had been gone almost a year, and it was the first season my aunt did everything without him. She's not the dramatic type. When she asked me to come out for a week to help with late season irrigation and a few odds and ends, I said yes. I had vacation time. I figured I'd get a tan and some peace and help her with whatever he used to do that none of us had thought about. Grease zerks on the pivot towers, check the algae in the stock tank, run into town for parts that fit almost but not quite. There are a handful of fields on her place, parceled by county roads and an old shelter belt. The main cornfield is this big rectangle that sits behind the house and barn. It's huge if you're walking and small if you're in a combine. They plant it in 30-inch rows, north to south, with headlands mowed down at the ends where the pivot can roll and the sprayer can turn. It's the same field where I learned to detassel for pocket money as a teenager, and the same field where my cousin Caleb got lost in when we were kids, for a whole hour that felt like a day. He came out scratched and snotty and furious at himself, and our uncle made a joke to make him feel better. Row 237 will trick you every time, he said, tapping the brim of his hat. Trixie Row. I believed him. Kids believe anything that helps the world make sense. The first night I was there, we ate dinner late because the heat took all day to let go. We sat at the kitchen table with the windows open to let the fan drag the air through. The crickets were so loud I had to lean forward to hear her. Storm's skirting us, my aunt said, glancing toward the west where lightning was painting a line we weren't invited to. We need to keep the pivot on for another night. Okay, I said, because that's the easiest word there is. She wiped her hands and hesitated. My aunt isn't a hesitator. I've seen her haul a stuck calf with one arm and a curse and then go make coffee like she was only late for church. But she hesitated. If you go out there after dark, she said, you take the side-by-side and you don't walk in. I know how to check the towers, I said, a little too quick, because I thought she was worried about me getting lost like Caleb had. She shook her head. It isn't that. What is it? I asked. She made a face like she was going to pick a tack out of her thumb. Never mind. Just humor me, okay? If a tower stalls, you wake me up. Don't go in the rows. Here's the thing about rational people. When they say something that sounds irrational, you pay attention. I nodded. We watched lightning skip us. The pivot lights blinked tiny green in the dark like the eyes of a bug. At midnight, the house woke me up all by itself. It does that, old farmhouses. The refrigerator cycles. The water heater breathes. Something shifts, and your brain says, "This was never quiet." I lay there with the window open and the smell of late summer coming in, the sweet and the mold and the hint of dirt after sprinklers. Then I heard the call. "Ma? Ma?" It was a kid's voice, thin and far and uncertain. I sat up, thinking neighbor. Sometimes the little ones wander. The yard light made everything outside black and white, overexposed and separate. The corn behind the house stood like a wall. "Ma?" Again. Closer, I knew the exact kind of tremble in it because I've had that tremble. Lost, but pretending not to be. I slid into jeans and a hoodie and met my aunt at the back door like we were moving in the same thought. "You heard it?" she said, not a question. "Yeah, a kid. I'll take the side-by-side and check the ditch." "No." It came out quicker and sharper than anything I'd ever heard from her. She caught my sleeve and then let go like the fabric had burned. "Aunt May," I said, surprised enough to use her name like I was 10. "If a kid is out there, then their mama will have already called," she said, voice flat with the kind of logic that ignores your heart. "Nobody called. Nobody's missing." As if on cue, my phone on the counter lit up with a weather alert. Wind advisory. Nothing about a missing child. I stared at the corn, at the ripple in the tassels that wasn't wind. In the gap where the pivot tower tracks the mud was glossy from the last cycle, reflecting the yard light like a pond. "Ma?" the voice called. One more time, right at the edge of the yard. The motion light over the barn woke. The shadow of the corn moved in a way that didn't match wind speed or direction, like a breath taken in and held. If you've ever watched a cat crouch in grass, you know that coiled stillness. That's what it looked like, the whole field, waiting. My aunt stepped back and reached for the kitchen door like she was closing a cage on something with teeth. "We're inside," she said, but not to me. I followed her inside because I don't argue with that flavor of voice. She locked the door. Then she locked it again. She turned off the kitchen light and stood with me in the dark, and we listened to the air scrape across the screen. The voice didn't call again. Somewhere in the distance, the pivot pump thumped and settled like a huge heart finding its beat. When I asked her about it in the morning, she didn't look surprised that I brought it up. She poured coffee, sat down, and told me a story like a person drives a fence post. Straight, no poetry, one hammer blow at a time. "When I was little," she said, "we didn't have a pivot. We flood irrigated. Your granddad would set the gates and we'd run water down the furrows. At night you could hear it talking. Not just water, something else. Once, when I was 8 or 9, I thought I heard my mother in the rows. She was calling me to come help with a calf, and I almost went. My brother caught me by the shirt. He said, 'That ain't Ma. Don't step in. It wants you to step in.' So I didn't. A week later, Caleb's mom swore she heard him crying in there, and she walked 3 rows deep before she realized the crying was never getting closer. After that, my dad put up a scarecrow by the headland. He said the field needed a face to look at so it wouldn't look for ours. She sipped her coffee like she'd said she had to run to town for bolts, and did I need anything while she was out. "People pretend this place is simple," she said. "It isn't. Don't walk in at night." "Okay," I said again, but the word felt different in my mouth, heavier. That day was hot enough to flatten time. We did chores. I changed out some worn sprinklers on the end gun. I checked for pests and broke a sweat by 9 a.m. We drove into town for diesel, and I grabbed a cold sandwich that made me miss my own terrible cooking. When we got back, the air had a wet weight to it, as if the sky couldn't remember how to rain, but wanted to mime the feeling. In late afternoon, the pivot alarm on my aunt's phone chirped and then shut itself up like it was embarrassed. A tower had stalled. Stalling happens. Pivots are long, heavy, particular creatures. One tower goes slow, one goes fast. The alignment switch sulks. The safety trips. Usually you walk to the trouble tower and rock it a little and threaten it with wrenches, and it gets jealous of attention and starts moving again. "I'll go," I said. "We'll go," my aunt said, and grabbed the keys to the side-by-side. We bumped down the lane past the windbreak into the field road by the headland. The corn was high enough that I couldn't see more than a few rows in. If you've ever been in a field that time of year, you know the smell. Green and dusty, and a little like blood from all the broken leaves. The tower's grown 20 yards in. Tower 3 had stopped, which meant 4 was pushing, which meant the whole arch was straining like a spine mid-sneeze. We parked at the headland. "Stay in the track," my aunt said, and we walked in where the pivot had flattened plants into a sort of trail. The tower lights glowed a kindly green. Cicadas sang like power lines. The center span creaked. I checked the tower panel. The safety was fine. The micro-switch arm was jammed. A dry cornstalk had wedged itself right under the trip. I yanked it free, felt the prickle of frayed leaves across my knuckles, and the tower shuddered and then hummed forward like it had been the tower's idea all along. "Thanks," my aunt said, "so even you'd think the machine could hear it." We went back to the side-by-side. I was 5 steps from the headland when I heard it again. Not the kid's voice. Something else. It sounded like my uncle. "Hey, kid," it called, that easy lilt he had when he wanted something heavy lifted, and he was about to pretend it was a favor to me. "Do me a solid." I froze so fast I felt it in my joints. My aunt was a stride ahead. She didn't turn. "Don't," she said. It called again. "Bring me the socket set, would you?" It could have been a recording. It could have been my memory. Except it came from 3 rows in, and it came with a smell that wasn't my uncle at all. Wet earth and something sweet like fruit left too long in a warm bowl. The hairs on my arms rose. "Okay," I said, but not to the voice. To my aunt. We drove back to the house in silence. If I had been there by myself, if this had been a story about me being brave or dumb, I might have gone in. I'm honest about that. The emotional reflex in me wanted to be helpful. And that's a dangerous reflex to have when something out there is good at sounding like people you miss. That night, the pivot ran smooth. No voices called. I slept with the window shut and dreamed about the windmill turning even though the blades weren't there anymore. When I woke up, the house smelled like toast and that particular sour trace that tells you rain finally happened. We'd gotten a sprinkle. The dust had turned to paste. The gravel in the lane was glued together. My aunt looked younger in the morning light. "Good," she said. "Let's get ahead of this day while it's distracted." The 3rd night is when things really broke open. And here's a detail that will sound random but sticks in my head. At sunset, we heard one of those rabbits scream in the field drive. If you've never heard a rabbit scream, it sounds like someone pouring boiling water on a baby. I hate it. Coyotes got it, probably. Nature is meaner than ghosts most of the time, so we went inside. I washed dishes. My aunt started sorting through some papers she'd been too tired to look at for a year after my uncle died. At 11, the pivot alarm went off and stayed off. We looked at each other across the table like we were playing the worst card game of chicken. She stood, grabbed her sweatshirt, and I did too. "I'll drive," I said. She didn't argue, which is how I knew she was tired or scared or both. We didn't talk on the way down the lane. When we cleared the windbreak, the field felt wrong. That's a stupid word. I know. Try walking into a room where someone has been angry, and you'll know what I mean. The air holds shape. The shape is not yours. Tower 5 was stalled this time, further in. We parked with the headlights pointed into the headland. "Stay in the track," she said, even though I had no intention of stepping out of it. The track had puddled with that thin layer of water on top of hard dirt you get after a light rain. Our boots made that suction sound every couple of steps. The leaves were wet enough to slap. The tower lights glowed green, but the panel read dead. No power. "Breaker," my aunt said, and we followed cords down the span to the next tower, then the next, tracing where the juice stopped. 2 ghosts with flashlights. That's how we ended up way too deep. 3 spans in, with our headlamps making tunnels in the dust, and our flashlights catching moths, and the metal of the tower sweating. We were both breathing louder than we needed to. That's another thing fear does. It turns you into a flawed machine. The breaker had tripped at Tower 7. I flipped it and heard the relay clack like a fingernail on a table. Nothing. The panel stayed dark. "Motor," my aunt said. "We'll have to walk back and kill it at the center and bring the side-by-side closer." "Okay," I said, and aimed back the way we'd come, except when I pointed my light at the ground. The track we'd made didn't look right. It curved off to the left in a way that didn't make sense with the shape of the field. We'd come straight in. The pivot makes straight lines until it doesn't. This was not straight. I stood still and tried to feel the direction in my bones, the way you do when you get up to pee in your own house in the dark. Nothing in me turned like a compass. Everything in me spun. "We didn't come this way," I said. "No," my aunt agreed. We looked at each other. The corn looked at us. "Okay," she said finally, in the voice of a person choosing the door with a tiger behind it, because the other door has a tiger and 2 snakes. "We follow the track anyway." We did. The track curved, and then I realized we weren't following our track at all. We were following a different one, older, the sort of track a person would make if they walked the headland at night with a bad idea and stuck to it for years. In the beam of my light, I saw old boot treads fossilized in dry mud that had been watered and dried and watered again. The pattern wasn't any modern boot I knew. The line of it snaked toward the middle. "What is this?" I asked. "Their trail," my aunt said, like a weather report. "They don't like to step on the plants any more than we do." "Whose?" I asked, even though I knew she wouldn't answer. We walked. The track ran to a cleared place around the center tower, a flattened circle where the pivot had rolled and rolled for years. In the middle stood a scarecrow. I know, that sounds like a punchline. It wasn't straw hats and flannel. It was made of rebar and wire and twine and things from a barn. The crossbar was a piece of an old gate. The head was a burlap sack tied tight at the neck with baling wire. Someone had drawn a face on the sack with a pencil, and the pencil had smeared because of damp. The eyes were black smudges. The mouth was a line that could be a smile if you were having a gentle day, and a knife if you weren't. Clothes hung on it that used to be my uncle's. I recognized the faded blue work shirt with the missing second button, and the way he'd rolled the cuffs twice, and then pushed them up the rest of the way. On the left sleeve, just above the elbow, someone had tied a little braid of corn silk, like a friendship bracelet. My aunt made a sound like a swallow that had considered coming back up. I have never heard that sound from her mouth before or since. "Did you put this here?" I asked, even though I knew the answer, and I think that was the point. Saying the wrong thing would make the right thing less sharp. She shook her head. They put it up after last fall, she said, like the words were a hitch in a line she was trying to pull tight. I didn't take it down. The pivot center motor sat at the base of the Scarecrow, humming with the power we'd expected to find at Tower 7. I turned to the control box and killed it. The field sighed. That's the only way I can say it. The wires relaxed and the metal stopped arguing. The silence after was loud. In it, I could hear breathing that wasn't ours. Or maybe it was the plants respiring. Maybe I was making it worse. I don't know. On the front of the control box, someone had scratched words into the paint with a nail. Just one line. Second planting is due. The letters were alarmingly neat, the way school kids printing is neat when they're concentrating on being good. What does that mean? I asked, to be annoying and safe. My aunt didn't answer because she was staring at the Scarecrow's shirt, at the left sleeve where the corn silk bracelet was tied. The hair on my neck prickled. My uncle had always tied a strip of blue twine around his left arm in busy seasons, a dumb superstition he picked up from an old neighbor who swore it kept you from getting tangled in the auger. He'd tie it and forget it was there. We used to tease him about it because teasing is how we loved him. This wasn't twine, though. It was fresh silk, pale gold. Some of it was still moist. "We should go," she said. "Yeah," I said. We did not go. Not immediately. Because as we turned, something stepped into the headland. It was the size of a person and the shape of a person, and it wore pale clothes the color of dried husks. It didn't move right. It moved like a thing that had watched us move and decided to try it. It stood under the center span, and the pivot framed it like a halo. "Ma?" it said, but not in the kid voice. In a voice it had tried to make sound like my aunt. She put her hand on my arm. Her fingers were damp and cold. "Don't," she said. I couldn't tell if she was saying it to me or to it. The thing took a step forward. It lifted one arm with the carefulness of a person balancing a bucket, and its hand uncurled like a dry leaf. Its face was wrong. You know how sometimes on Halloween you see a cheap plastic mask that's supposed to be human, and it's close enough to trick your brain from one angle, but not if you look straight on? It was that, except it was trying to be my uncle's face. It had the same jawline. It had the same forehead. But the eyes were not eyes. They were holes where tassel shadows pooled. The mouth was a split in the husk. "Do me a solid," it said, almost right. "Bring me the socket set, kid." I don't consider myself brave. I stood there and thought, if this is a hallucination, I'm going to feel really stupid later, which is maybe the most city thought anyone ever had in a field. Then the thing took another step, and I smelled that sweet rot smell again, like a bowl of peaches gone fuzzy in the sun. My aunt did something I didn't expect. She took her pocket knife out and cut the bracelet of corn silk off the Scarecrow's sleeve. She held it up. The thing stopped like we had pressed a remote. "No," she said to it, voice steady now, the same voice she'd used on calves and stuck augers, and once on the sheriff when he said he didn't have time to come out. "Not this one. You got your due." The thing tilted its head. The leaves around us made a shiver that wasn't wind. Then, clear as a bell coming from 3 directions at once, I heard the cry from the first night. "Ma?" It came from behind us. It came from the right. It came from the left. I couldn't tell if it was one voice or a dozen. My stomach tried to sink and realized bodies don't do that. I had a sudden flash of being a kid and playing those games where you take 2 steps into the rows and your cousins jump out and grab your ankles. That laughter, that panic, that mean sweetness. This wasn't that, but my body remembered the shape. I must have moved, because my aunt squeezed my arm so hard I felt it for days. "Don't," she said. "Don't answer. Don't step in." The scarecrow creaked on its rebar spine as if a wind had turned it. There was no wind. It faced the thing in pale husks. The thing in pale husks lifted its head and looked at the scarecrow as if finally registering that something else had eyeballs. It hissed, not like a snake, like dry corn shelling out of a husker, a dry, shucky rush. The scarecrow didn't move again. The thing hissed louder. Then it stepped backwards 1 careful step at a time, reached the headland, and vanished into the rows without disturbing a single leaf. We stood there until my calves shook. Then we walked out, slow, careful not to step on our own feet. The side-by-side sat in the headland, looking like a toy, like it could be crushed between fingers that weren't there. In the kitchen again, with the door closed and the light on, my aunt picked up her coffee mug from earlier and drank like she'd been holding that sip in her mouth all along. She set the mug down with a click. "I'm sorry," she said. "I should have told you sooner." "Told me what?" I asked, though I think we both know I wanted to hear it in plain language. She started telling me pieces. How every few years, someone in the area would go missing, and they'd find them later in a place nobody had searched, in a field all trampled to forgiveness. How sometimes they'd find old shoes, one year, the other in another year. How once, years back, a toddler was found sleeping between rows in a storm with corn silk braided around her wrist and a smile on her face, and she didn't remember who braided it. How the first harvest after a drought always felt watched. How my uncle calmed something in the field, and then he died and it didn't like that, and the scarecrow showed up built from his shirts, and she didn't dare take it down. None of it was an explanation. It was a list of receipts. The column of numbers didn't add up to a simple total. "Second planting?" I asked, pointing a finger toward the field like it could see me. "What is that?" She stared at the grain of the table. "There's a story my dad told that I thought was one of those stories men tell to keep kids from doing dumb things. He said in the really old days before irrigation, some years the first planting would fail. They'd take their seed and put it in the earth, and it would look good for a while, and then something would eat it. Or a frost would come late, or the river would take it. And the old men would say the land wanted a second planting, and that the second planting usually took. But sometimes they said it different, like something wanted something else for the second planting. A tithe, a trade. A person, I said. She shrugged. They never said it like that. You know how they are. They say a lot without saying it. When your uncle died, he didn't die in the field. He had a stroke on the driveway. He didn't get to say goodbye to the ground the way he would have wanted. I think it made a knot somewhere I can't untie. I wanted to argue with that, because my brain prefers problems with screws and parts and an instruction manual in bad translation. Instead, I said what felt like the only practical question. What do we do? She smiled, not a happy smile, an exhausted one. Finish the season, she said. Keep the water running. Cut the crop. Don't go in at night. Don't answer it. Don't pull down the scarecrow until we're done. After that, I don't know. Okay, I said for the third time in 2 days, and I meant it in a way that included more fear than agreement. The next day, the neighbor's boy went missing. His name was Tyler. He was 10 and at that obnoxiously fearless stage where everything is a dare because nothing has really hurt you. He lived 1.5 miles down the gravel with his mom and grandparents. He'd been chasing grasshoppers and hadn't come back for lunch. They split up to look. You can imagine the rest. People drove slowly down lanes calling his name like you could bait a kid with his own echo. 4-wheelers went up and down the ditches. The sheriff parked his cruiser in the center of it all and did that thing where you act like being central makes you in charge. They didn't call us because they didn't want people traipsing across fields and damaging crops. That's the logic you hear in every missing kid story out here until it isn't logic anymore. We heard about it at 4, when Tyler's grandpa came by on a 4-wheeler, hat in hand. He didn't make a lot of eye contact. He asked if we'd mind if they cut across our headland to check the creek behind the shelter belt. He apologized 5 times in one sentence. He didn't mention the corn. Of course, my aunt said. We'll help. Then, when he'd gone, she turned to me. We will help, she repeated, like a vow. We will not go into the rows. It should have been easy. He was a kid. He liked grasshoppers. The last place anybody saw him was the ditch by the culvert where the headland meets the county road. The big field is a rectangle. There are only so many places to go. Except fields aren't geometry. They're other kinds of shape. Places where water holds memory and wind forgets itself. We walked the headlands. We checked the creek. We called his name in civilized voices because that's what you do at first. And then less civilized ones because the sun was moving toward a place where every shadow lengthens into bad thoughts. I carried a Gatorade bottle and a granola bar in my pocket because hope looks like snacks sometimes. We found flattened grass where he might have sat. We found a smashed milkweed pod where he definitely played. We found a row end where it looked like someone stepped just inside and then came out again. They were kids' prints. I know what kids' prints look like. Little heels. Toes that point bankruptly straight when they run. We didn't go into the row. People say courage is going in anyway. I think sometimes courage is staying out. By sundown, the official search had widened to places where they knew he wasn't, because all of us were terrified of where he might be. They looked in culverts. They looked in the neighbor's shop. They looked behind the dairy. My aunt and I went home and sat at the table and didn't take our boots off. At 10, the sheriff called. They'd found him. He was asleep in his own bed, covered in dust, like he'd been rolled in flour. Nobody knew how he got there. His mother was hysterical and offended in one breath. His grandfather was half drunk already. The sheriff sounded relieved and angry, mostly because he'd have to write a report that made sense of a thing that didn't. We said we were glad. We were. What do you think? I asked after we hung up. I think I'm going to take a casserole to his mama tomorrow because she's going to be mad at him for scaring her, and then mad at herself for being mad and nobody is going to eat, my aunt said. You don't think we should? I gestured at the black window in the corner of the field I could see from where we sat. She stared into her coffee. I think it got what it wanted, she said softly. It gave him back. Second planting, I said before I could stop myself. Was the first you or Uncle? And the second is... I trailed off because I'm not a monster. I'm not going to say a kid's name like that. She put her hand over mine. Don't go bargaining with it in your head, she said. It makes bargains we don't get to make. We went to bed. I didn't sleep. At 1, the pivot alarm went off, and then stayed off, and then went off again. The wind had picked up, a hot, weird wind like the kind that makes fires jump roads in the west. Leaves thrashed against the screens. I got up and paced. The house felt small. I wanted to go outside and stand under the sky where there was room for the fear to move around me. Then I heard a knock. Not at the front door. At the window over the sink. 3 slow knocks. Like knuckles on glass. I froze in the doorway like my feet had decided they were furniture. The motion light didn't turn on because the sensor was on the other side of the house. The window over the sink was black and flat, and my own face looked back at me with streaks of light from the clock. The knocks came again. 3. Polite. The exact tempo of my uncle's knock when he came in from the shop and didn't want to scare my aunt. I don't know if I would have walked to the window and looked. I honestly don't. I can't guess at the version of me in that other timeline. Because in this one, my aunt stepped in front of me, like she'd been standing in the hallway the whole time, listening to me breathe. Go wake the neighbors, she said. Get the Lunds and the Bakers. Tell them our pivot's down, and we need help. What? I whispered. In the middle of the night? She looked at me and something in my chest stopped squirming. We need a fire, she said. I can't do it alone. When a woman who can birth a calf alone in a blizzard says she can't do a thing alone, you go get help. I ran to my boots, to the truck. The wind banged the screen door. The gravel took the tires like it had been waiting. I knocked on the Lund's door first and startled their healer into a rage. They didn't ask many questions because neighbors here don't when voice and timing together tell them it's real. I hit the Bakers next. Old man Baker pulled on his overalls over his shorts and didn't bother with socks. We caravanned back to my aunt's in 3 vehicles with 2 shotguns and 1 fire extinguisher, and one of those old metal coffee cans that everybody uses as a container for nails until it becomes a container for 1,000 other things. What are we burning? Baker asked, standing in the yard with his hair slicked to his head by sweat. The wind was pushing and poking and not going anywhere. The corn leaned like an audience. Headlands, my aunt said. A ring. Just a thin one. We disked a break last week. We'll keep it in the black and call it a goddamn controlled burn if anybody asks. Controlled by what? Lund's wife muttered, but she hefted the extra shovel out of her truck bed and grabbed the drip torch like a woman who'd been practicing for this moment her whole life. We lit it at 2 points on the north edge so we could fight it back at the field road if it ran. The fire caught reluctantly. Corn is a weird thing to burn. Green corn sulks. Dry corn flares. This was in between. The ring crawled and then found itself, and then started moving with terrible confidence. Fire is hungry, but it's not greedy if you give it a path. We gave it a path. It licked the headland and ate the weeds and curled paper out of the volunteer trees. Sparks rose and vanished in the wind. The men with shotguns never took them off their shoulders. It sounds ridiculous to say that now, but at the time it didn't. You arm yourself with what you know. As the ring began to close toward the south edge, the pivot center started turning. The towers bumped and creaked like a carnival ride waking up. The green lights came on, one after another, as if someone were running down the line flipping switches. I knew we had cut power at the center. I had done it. I felt it in my bones like a test I knew I'd passed. But the machine moved. The end gun swung like a finger. The wind turned and pushed the fire toward us with a polite insistence that made my mouth taste like pennies. The men stamped and shoveled and swore in the measured way men swear when they've been doing it since before you were born. The ring reached the north edge again. We twisted the torch closed. The dust fell like dandruff. Nobody spoke. We were all listening for a noise we didn't want to hear, and we heard it anyway. A child laughing, not the witchy cackle horror movies use. A normal giggle, high and close, and the kind that says a joke was made and all is forgiven. It came from behind us, then in front, then far to the left. The corn rustled like applause. "Do not answer," my aunt said, very calm. Baker's wife did anyway. "Tyler," she called, because she loved that kid and she was allowed to be imperfect. "You go home right now." The giggle stopped. The wind went weird the way it does right before a sky goes green. The pivot stopped and then stuttered as if something heavy had leaned against a span. "Inside," my aunt said, and nobody argued. We crowded into the kitchen, 5 adults in varying states of bravery, our shoes tracking ash. My aunt stood with her back to the sink and her hands flat on the countertop. She looked small and tall at the same time. "If anybody knocks," she said, "do not open the door. If anybody you know calls your name, do not answer. If your phone rings, ignore it. If a child cries, I will deal with it. If you hear an old song you like, pretend you do not." Baker gave a half laugh and then looked ashamed of it. "What exactly are we doing here, May?" She didn't look at him. "We're not getting lost," she said. Something bumped the wall outside like a cow scratching itself against the house. The plates in the hutch rattled. The wind dipped and went somewhere else. The house made that house noise when a pressure changes all at once. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, every cabinet door in the kitchen swung open and shut once. Hard. I flinched so big I hit the corner of my hip against the table hard enough to bruise. The phone on the wall, which hadn't rung in a year because my aunt used her cell phone for everything now, rang. One old-fashioned jangle. Then silence. We waited. 10 seconds. 20. The wall clock clacked. The fridge cycled. The house, bored of scaring us, went back to being a house. Outside, the pivot motor hummed in a logical way I would have found soothing yesterday. At dawn, the Lunds went home because the world made sense again and they had cows to feed. The Bakers stayed for coffee because Baker's wife was not going to go to her empty kitchen right away. We sat there holding cups like talismans while my aunt told me to go check the burn line. The ring had stayed exactly where we told it to. It curled around the field like a wedding band. In the ash, I found 3 sets of prints I couldn't name. Not deer, not raccoon, not coyote. Long, narrow, human enough to make my stomach fold. They came to the edge of the black and stopped. Then they walked parallel to it, like a person pacing a fence they didn't want to cross, because it wasn't their fence to cross. When I came back in, My aunt was staring at the corn silk bracelet on the table, the one she'd cut from the scarecrow. She looked like she was trying to decide whether it had been a good trade, or if she'd done something terrible we just didn't understand yet. "You can't live like this," I said, not because I had a solution, but because a solution-shaped sentence wanted out of me. She laughed, and then covered her mouth like laughter might make it realer. "Tell that to the mortgage," she said. "Tell it to the soil test. Tell it to the bank. Tell it to your uncle's shirts." We made it through the next 2 weeks. We finished irrigating. The pivot behaved like it wanted us to think this had all been one of those mid-season breakdowns that you forget about until it's time to complain about something at the co-op over donuts. We cut the headlands by hand where the fire had singed too much. We fixed a fence a storm took down in a part of the field where the wind sounded like a person whispering an old joke. The scarecrow stayed. I avoided the center unless I had to go. When I did, I nodded at it, like you nod at a person you hope counts you as polite. We harvested early. The moisture wasn't perfect, but my aunt didn't want to wait. Neither did I. It felt like an argument you have with a partner you love, and you both agree to apologize before either of you says something that requires an apology. We ran the combine long days. We dumped into the grain cart and then into the bins, and the dryer fans kicked on with that roar that makes you shout even when you're standing 3 feet apart. The smell of drying corn is church to me. It fills all the cracks fear hides in. On the last night, we cut the last half circle under a sky so clear the stars made me think of insects. We made the ritual last pass at the center, where someone clever had once drilled a little patch of sorghum that never did very well. The header chewed in. The rows vanished and opened like curtains. I could see the scarecrow. My aunt could too. She stopped the machine. We sat there with the engine idling and the cab smelling like oil and dust and the ghost of childhood. "Will you stand with me?" she asked. "Of course," I said. We climbed down, 2 people in boots, and walked to the scarecrow like mourners. Up close, it looked smaller than it had at night, less supernatural, more the work of hands, which somehow made it worse. The corn silk bracelet had dried and gone brown on the sleeve. The shirt smelled like attic. The burlap sack had split at the seam, and something had nested inside. I didn't look too close. I didn't want to know what species calls a burlap head home. My aunt took the baling wire in her hand and twisted it back the other direction. It's funny how much of farm life is just doing and undoing different versions of twists. The wire let go. The scarecrow slumped, a puppet whose strings had been cut. We lowered it onto the black dirt piece by piece. Metal clinked. Cloth sighed. The center motor hummed behind us like a throat clearing. She picked up the shirt at the end. "He'd laugh at me," she said. "He'd say, 'May, what are you doing making ghosts out of my laundry?' He'd say whatever would make you stop crying," I said, and then looked away because my own eyes were not behaving. We carried the pieces back to the headland and laid them in the bed of the side-by-side. We didn't burn them. We didn't bury them. We folded them into a plastic tote the way you put away winter clothes, knowing that someday, maybe, you'll need them again, even if you hope you won't. Then we climbed back into the combine and finished the field, and the count on the monitor rolled to 0 in a way that felt like a promise kept. That night, the house was quiet. No knocks, no voices. The wind pretended it had never been mean. The next morning I woke to the sound of the bin fan shutting off and realized I had slept a whole night without waking. When I walked out to the yard, the ring of blackweed burned had already faded to a gray lace. Tracks from deer crisscrossed it. Normal life had taken back its seat. A week later, back home in the city, I opened my backpack to find a little twist of dried corn silk tucked into the side pocket where I keep receipts and chapstick. It wasn't the one from the scarecrow. This one had a knot in it. Not the way my aunt ties knots. The way my uncle did. Left-handed, backwards and neat. There wasn't a note. There didn't need to be. I mailed it to my aunt in an envelope with no return address because if you're going to do witchcraft in the Midwest, you do it passive-aggressively. She called me 2 days later, laughing and crying at the same time. "You little idiot," she said, which is the kindest name she's ever called me. "Thank you. Did anything?" I trailed off. She sighed. "The field's quiet," she said. "For now." When people ask me if the country is peaceful, I say yes, mostly. It's peaceful the way an old dog is peaceful. It's quiet until it's not. It sleeps until it's dreaming. It waits, and when you turn your back, it remembers your shape. I don't drive past cornfields at night anymore if I can help it. If I have to, I keep my windows rolled up and my radio on a station that plays human voices. If someone in a ditch calls for help, I call the sheriff, and then I blink and count and breathe and do not step into the rows until the sun can see me. If a scarecrow is standing where it shouldn't be, I nod and don't stare. If the pivot is down after midnight, I wake someone up. The older I get, the more convinced I am that rules exist because somebody didn't have them yet, and something took advantage. Here are mine, for what they're worth. Take them or don't. Tape them to your glove box. Laugh at them in the daylight, and remember them at dark. Don't answer the corn at night. Don't step into the rows if someone you love calls you by a name only they use. Don't take down a scarecrow that isn't yours. Don't do favors for voices you can't see. If you have to burn a ring, make sure you've got help. And make sure you say thank you when they show up aching and annoyed and still there. If something knocks 3 times on the window, go wake a neighbor before you look. If the field wants a second planting, plant kindness in town instead and hope it takes. Sometimes it does. Sometimes a kid comes home dusty and asleep, and the only thing you can do is not ask the kind of questions that make monsters more certain. It's easier to say, "It's all in your head," when you live in a place where the walls are made of neighbors and bus schedules. Out there, the walls are made of wind and belief. The nights are big enough to hold 1,000 wrong turns. The corn is big enough to be a city if you're small and scared and the moon is new. My aunt still lives there. She still irrigates. She still puts pies on the windowsill that make the kitchen smell like old holidays. She keeps a little braid of corn silk tied to the nail where the calendar hangs. Not because she thinks it's magic, but because it reminds her to be polite to things she doesn't own. If you're ever out this way late in the season and you think you hear someone you love, be rude. Walk away. Go wake the neighbor. Be the idiot with the flashlight who waits until dawn and looks like a fool. Be the person who tapes weird rules to their glove compartment. Be the one who tells your version of this story to your version of me over coffee while the bin fans hum. Because the land has a long memory and a long reach. and it likes company as much as we do. It will take yours if you offer it too easily. It will mimic your uncle's hands and your cousin's laugh, and it will wait in the rows for the part of you that believes helping is always good. I still love the country. I still love the way the morning smells like new pennies and grass, and something you can name if you've lived there long enough to stop naming it. But love doesn't mean ignoring teeth. It means seeing them and pressing your hand to your friend's sleeve and saying, "Don't. Not tonight." It means standing in your aunt's kitchen with a gun you don't really believe in and a drip torch you do. And it means making a ring of black that tells the field you know the edges. And it means when something says, "Do me a solid," in a voice that belongs to someone you miss, you say, "No." Not because you're brave, but because somebody told you a story and you believed it. Because believing stories might be the only magic we get. Because corn whispers even when no one is walking there, and roads and fields both like to trick us into thinking we're alone. We aren't. Not here. Not ever. If you need me, call. If I don't answer, I'm probably making sure the windows are shut and the kitchen light is on and the night is busy with something else. And if you ever hear a child giggle from 3 places at once, look at your boots, tie your laces, and go wake your neighbor. Don't answer the corn.